Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, what happens when a book goes too far? This is my review of The Deep by Nick Cutter. So let me start by defining what I mean by too far. I do not mean that this book is too horrific or too graphic, although it is definitely horrific and graphic. What I mean is what happens when a book tries to do too many different things. I think this is a great example of a book that has elements that are absolutely fantastic, but it tries to weave too many different things together to be a satisfying book. It's just got too much going on. So let me tell you a bit about the plot and then I'll tell you why I think this book didn't work. But before I do that, let me talk very quickly about the author. So the name on the cover here is Nick Cutter. That is not the author's real name. He's quite interesting though, from what I can gather. So the author's real name is Craig Davidson. He's a Canadian. And under the name Craig Davidson, he publishes kind of literary fiction type stuff. So I haven't read any of his Craig Davidson books, but I know that some of them have been nominated for literary awards and that kind of thing. So not necessarily my kind of book. He also writes horror though, so he's published a few different books as Nick Cutter and also some books under another name which I hadn't heard of, Patrick Lestuka. I think that's how you pronounce it. So yeah, I've not read any of those books, but I've read two now of his Nick Cutter books. So the other one I've read is The Troop, which is I think the one he's best known for. It was a book that a few years ago everybody seemed to be reading, and it is a fun horror novel. I didn't love The Troop. I certainly didn't like it as much as many people seem to, but it's got a lot going for it. So The Troop is kind of a disease novel. So it's about this horrible disease that infects a scout troop and the impacts on them. So it's got a lot of body horror. It's very gross at times. It's quite over the top. But it's quite a nice focused book. The Deep is the opposite. The Deep is not a focused book at all. And that's what I think is the problem with it. So the plot is there is a new disease that has swept the world, which is called the Gets. And what it causes is it causes people to lose their memory. So the effects are kind of like Alzheimer's, but it happens much more quickly and people can be infected by it. So this is like decimating populations around the world and has had impacts on the lives of a number of characters in the book as well. So what happens is they somehow, and I can't remember how now, they discover that at the bottom of the Marianas Trench, so the deepest point in the ocean, there is this substance that they believe will be able to cure this disease. And a top scientist and some other people are sent down to this research lab in the depths of the ocean to investigate this. Naturally, something goes wrong. The people on the surface lose contact with the team down in the lab, and the brother of the main scientist is recruited to go down and try and figure out what's going on. So he goes down in a submersible with this kind of tough female naval officer to try and find out what's happening. So the setup is kind of like something like The Abyss. It's kind of a sci-fi horror underwater kind of a story. But what Nick Cutter then does is throw a load of other things into the mix. So there is a lot of very kind of creepy, suspenseful, almost haunted house type horror as they get down to this underground or underwater lab and start exploring it. There is a load of very, very gross and very effective, I have to say, body horror. There's also a load of stuff which I think probably comes more from the Craig Davidson side of Nick Cutter's personality, if you like, more kind of literary type stuff that is around like family dynamics. So particularly the dynamic between the scientist who's gone down in the lab and his brother who's gone down to try and rescue him. So a lot about their childhood and things like that, and about their mother. There's a lot of kind of childhood trauma and that kind of thing woven into it. There's also a whole backstory about the brother who's gone to save the scientist and his child. So there is just a ton of different stuff in this book, and it's not that long a book, and it just felt to me like Nick Cutter was trying to cram too many things in. And what that means is the tone of the book changes quite frequently, and in a way that's effective because it's kind of a bit unsettling, but it's also quite unsatisfying because I never quite felt like I'd got to grips with what the book was trying to do. What you also find because of that is that there are a load of different narrative threads running through the book, and sometimes that can be effective, but I'm not sure that it was here. So you've got, the kind of current day events. You've got the impact of this new disease on the world. You've got the childhood trauma that the two brothers have suffered, and then you've also got stuff around the child of the main character. And all of those things are kind of competing with each other a bit for your attention, but they're all also kind of narratively pulling apart from each other. So what you end up with is a situation where at the end of the book, Nick Cutter needs to weave all of those things together, and he does it in a way that I have to say I thought was very, very unsatisfying. So I really didn't like the end of this book at all. It felt quite kind of Deus Ex Machina. It's like he just plucked a solution out of thin air and tried to make that work. And for me, it didn't feel like the rest of the book led up properly to that solution. There's also a very strange thing that happens in this book in that it starts off being about this disease, but then that disease becomes less and less relevant as the book goes on. And it almost feels like he didn't need that disease at all for the book to have worked. He could have just made it about something being discovered at the bottom of the sea that scientists think will cure cancer or something like that, and a team going down to try and find it for that reason. It felt like you kind of expect after the first few chapters for the books very specifically to be about this new disease, which is, the idea of a disease that makes you lose your memory is really interesting. And then he does basically nothing with that. So that for me was another source of disappointment. This felt to me like a book that was about 3 or 4 different books crammed into one. And I think he could have done with a better editor to help him take out parts of the book that weren't really necessary to the core story and to make it more effective overall as a result. But that said, there are parts of this book that are really, really effective. There are some individual scenes which are fantastically well done, some very creepy stuff, some very, very gross stuff, some really memorably horrific images that have stuck with me since I finished the book. So I definitely think Nick Cutter / Craig Davidson is a talented writer in some ways, but I think as a storyteller, he probably fails a bit in this book. There's just too many things crammed into it for it to work effectively as a novel. So those are my thoughts on The Deep by Nick Cutter. I think parts of it are excellent, but as a whole, it doesn't really work. But he's definitely got a talent for horror. So if you've read other things by him, particularly if they weren't The Troop, do let me know in the comments if you think I should check them out. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.